Have you ever found yourself thinking about someone you haven't heard from in weeks, or maybe even years, only to feel this strange pull in your chest, or to hear a song that instantly brings them back into your mind, like they never left? Maybe, out of nowhere, a memory floats up while you're sipping your morning coffee, or their name appears on your phone or your screen, like the universe just tapped you on the shoulder and whispered, "They're thinking of you too." Now, if you're over 60, you might already know this feeling more intimately than most. You've lived through deep relationships, unspoken goodbyes, and that quiet kind of love that never really fades, no matter how many birthdays pass. And sometimes, just sometimes, you wonder, what if it's not just you? What if, at this very moment, they're thinking of you too? That might sound a little mystical, maybe even silly to some. But the truth is, life has taught us that not everything can be explained by logic alone. There are moments when something stirs deep inside, an emotion, a signal, a knowing, and you just feel connected to someone, even across miles or decades. That's what we're going to explore today. This isn't about fantasy. It's about something real, quiet, and deeply human. The invisible bond that sometimes ties two hearts together without a single word. Let's begin by looking at one of the most common yet most overlooked signs. Have you ever been going about your day feeling perfectly fine, and then out of nowhere something shifts? One moment you're calm, the next. Your chest tightens, your thoughts feel heavy, or you're hit by a wave of longing you can't quite explain. Maybe you feel anxious, or maybe tears well up in your eyes, without a single clear reason. This kind of emotional shift isn't always just about you. Sometimes you're picking up on something deeper. When two people share a strong emotional history, especially if it was never fully resolved, there can be an energetic link between them. You might not be able to see it or measure it, but you can feel it. It's as if your body becomes a tuning fork, and their emotional frequency starts vibrating through you. This might sound unusual, but think of it this way. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt the tension, even before anyone said a word? Emotions are energy. They move. They land. They echo. So if someone you once loved, or still love, is going through something and thinking about you deeply, that wave can reach you, even if they don't pick up the phone. You may feel it as a sudden need to text them, or a strong urge to check in, even though you haven't thought of them in weeks. These fluctuations are not random. They are, in many ways, the body's way of alerting you to something your mind hasn't caught up with yet. And that brings us to something else that happens more often than people realize: coincidences. Or what seem like coincidences at first glance. You're thinking of someone, maybe even dreaming about them, and the next day someone else brings up their name. Or you scroll through your social media feed and there's their picture. Or maybe a quote appears on your screen. Something they used to say, word for word. You stop in your tracks, wondering, what are the odds? Let me tell you something many people only start to believe after 60. The odds don't matter when the moment means something. When the heart is involved, so-called coincidences start piling up like breadcrumbs, guiding you somewhere your soul already knows. Have you ever been driving and a song plays that was your song, even if the relationship ended long ago? Or you look at the clock and it reads the exact time you used to call each other every night? These patterns feel personal for a reason. They're not proof of anything in the scientific sense, but they're deeply meaningful in the emotional sense. And when you've lived a full life, you begin to recognize that what feels real often is, even if it can't be explained. There's a quiet language in all of this, not made of words, but of symbols, timing, repetition, the way someone's memory can suddenly flood in when you're about to make an important decision or when your heart is open and vulnerable. These signals may not be something you can explain to others, but you don't have to. Because when it happens to you, You just know. You feel it. And speaking of feeling things, dreams have a curious way of carrying messages, don't they? There are nights when sleep doesn't feel like sleep. It feels like a visit. A dream so vivid that you wake up breathless. You see their face, hear their voice, feel the warmth of their presence. And for a moment, it feels more real than anything that happened the day before. Sometimes these dreams come just before a big change in your life. Other times they come when you're missing them the most, or right before they reach out unexpectedly. Maybe they don't contact you, but the dream lingers. It clings. It means something. Some people report dreaming of someone they haven't seen in years. And then, without warning, that person shows up in their life, not always in dramatic ways. Sometimes it's a message, sometimes a mutual friend mentions them, sometimes it's just an emotional wave that reminds you they're still out there, and part of them remembers you too. It's important to pay attention to what you feel in these dreams, not just what happens, but how it feels. Were you comforted? Were you loved? Were you letting go? Dreams can help the heart express what words never could. And sometimes when two people are emotionally bonded, those dreams feel like shared spaces, like a place where the soul reaches out even when the mind can't. Now, this connection doesn't always show up in dreams or coincidences. Sometimes it's simply a shift in your body, a change you feel without warning or reason. You're standing at the kitchen sink and suddenly your stomach flutters. Or you feel a warmth move through your chest. Or the air feels heavier, like something or someone just entered the room, though no one is there. Some people get goosebumps. Others feel a soft ache behind their eyes. A sudden emotional charge that feels like a whisper from somewhere else. These physical sensations aren't always just about memory or nostalgia. They can be subtle signals that someone somewhere is thinking about you. Remember, the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. It stores every laugh, every heartbreak, every touch. So when something stirs inside, listen. Your body is wiser than you think. When you're older, you become more aware of these nuances. You no longer brush them off. You've felt enough of life to know that some moments carry more weight than they seem to. Some feelings refuse to be ignored. And some people, no matter how far away, still reach you. It's a quiet evening. You're reading, folding laundry, or watching something familiar on TV, and suddenly you feel something shift. The room hasn't changed, but you have. It's as if someone's thinking about you so intently that it pulls on something invisible inside you. And you pause, not sure why. But you feel it. A wave of emotion. A name you haven't spoken in years comes rushing in like it never left. These shifts may not always make sense, but they're real. And as we grow older, we become more aware of them. Not because we're becoming more emotional, but because we're learning to trust what we feel without needing proof. Some people call them signs. Others call them nudges, or messages, or intuition. But whatever you call them, they tend to come in waves. And the symbols that accompany them? They're often startling in their clarity. Maybe it's a certain number you keep seeing, a time on the clock, a street name, a song lyric, something that shouldn't mean anything to anyone else, but to you, it feels personal, deeply personal, almost too perfect to be random. It might be the same set of numbers showing up again and again on receipts, license plates, your phone, or you hear a phrase they used to say, spoken by someone else in passing. These moments stir something inside you. They make you pause, smile. Sometimes they even bring tears to your eyes. And you ask yourself, why now? There's something powerful about repetition. When certain images, numbers, or sounds keep appearing just as someone comes to mind, it's not always about chance. It's about resonance, a memory that hasn't finished speaking, a connection that refuses to fade quietly. Even science can't fully explain why our brains catch on to certain patterns. But our hearts know. Our hearts recognize what matters, even when we pretend we've moved on. And then there's that unmistakable feeling, the one where you sense their presence, even though they're nowhere near you. It might be while you're driving, lost in thought, or standing by the window watching the rain. And then, without any warning, you feel them. Not just in your memory, but in your body. Like they're right there beside you. As if you could turn your head and see them smiling at you. It's hard to explain, but even harder to ignore. That feeling of being wrapped in a familiar warmth, or a heaviness that sits with you for no reason at all. You might even say to yourself, it's like they're here. And maybe they are. Not physically, but emotionally. Energetically. Their memory carries weight, and it lingers in the spaces where love once lived. Some people think of it as your nervous system remembering. Others call it energy. Some say it's simply grief that hasn't fully left. But whatever name you give it, the experience is universal. The deep soul-level awareness that someone is thinking of you in that very moment. And somehow, you know it. And the strange thing? These feelings aren't always tied to joy. Sometimes they come with unease, or even pain. You might feel anxious or unsettled without knowing why, only to discover later that the person you were thinking about was going through something difficult at the exact same time. There's a kind of silent communication that exists when emotions run deep. A whisper between two hearts. A shift that moves through both of you without a single word spoken. And there are times when you and that person experience changes at the exact same moment. Even if you're not speaking, even if you're not in the same room, or city, or life anymore. You're feeling unusually nostalgic, and later you find out they were too. You both wake up from a restless night, unable to explain why. Or you feel pulled to reach out, and they already have. This isn't fantasy. It's the power of emotional resonance. When two people have shared real connection, love, grief, vulnerability, that energy leaves an imprint. And it can echo across time, across silence, across any distance. The shift doesn't need a reason. It just happens. People who've experienced great love or heartbreak understand this better than anyone. The older we get, the more we learn that not everything needs to be visible to be real. Some of the strongest bonds don't live in our calendars or our text messages. They live in our hearts. And sometimes silence says more than 1,000 words. You haven't spoken to them in months, maybe years. But something about the silence feels alive, heavy, full. It's not the kind of silence that feels empty or forgotten. It's the kind of silence that hums with unspoken words, unsent letters, and all the things you never got to say. There's no call, no email, no knock at the door, but you feel them thinking of you. And maybe, just maybe, they feel you too. This kind of silence carries weight. It's the space between what was and what still might be. It holds memories, hopes, fears, and it lingers in the air like the last note of a beautiful song. Some people believe that when we resist a feeling, when we push it down or pretend it doesn't matter, it grows stronger. Not louder, but deeper. It starts to live in our body, our dreams, our intuition. And in that silence, we start to sense things without anyone saying a word. You might not be able to prove it, but you don't need to. You've lived long enough to know that not everything has to be explained to be trusted. Sometimes you just know. You just feel it. And perhaps the most mysterious of all these signs is this. You know deep down that they'll come back. You feel it in your gut, in your bones. It's not hope. It's not wishful thinking. It's something else. A quiet certainty that keeps showing up in your dreams, your thoughts, your heart, You've tried to move on. Maybe you have. But a part of you still feels their return before it even happens. And when it does, it doesn't surprise you, because your soul already knew. Call it intuition. Call it knowing. But sometimes we pick up on things before the world catches up. Because connection doesn't always begin with a phone call. Sometimes it begins with a feeling. And when someone matters deeply to you, when they've touched your life in ways that left a mark, your heart knows how to find them, even in silence. There's a moment that's hard to describe, but many people over 60 know it well. You're not thinking of anyone in particular until suddenly you are. Their name comes to you out of nowhere. A memory surfaces. A moment long gone flashes through your mind clear as day. And just like that, your mood changes. It could be peaceful, or bittersweet, or so intense it knocks the breath out of you. That shift, that sudden feeling, doesn't always start with a thought. Sometimes it begins with your body. Maybe it's a flutter in your stomach, a sudden tightness in your chest, goosebumps on your arms when there's no chill in the air, or a rush of energy that seems to come from somewhere outside of you. And you pause, wondering, what just happened? Some people call it instinct. Others call it energy. But what matters is what you feel. Because often, when someone you're emotionally connected to is thinking about you, your body knows it before your mind does. That's the beautiful and mysterious part of growing older. You stop needing everything to make sense. You begin to trust your senses. You've lived long enough to know that some things can't be seen or touched, but they are still very, very real. You might feel a strong urge to reach out. No reason, no explanation, just a feeling you can't ignore. And when you do reach out, they say, "I was just thinking of you." And you smile, not surprised, just quietly amazed at how life finds a way to reconnect people at the right moment. That kind of moment isn't about luck. It's about resonance. When two hearts are tuned to the same frequency, they don't need words. They simply feel. Sometimes this feeling takes the shape of symbols. You glance at the clock and see 11:11. You pass by a place you used to go together. You hear a song that hasn't played in years, but somehow it finds you right when you're thinking about them. These signs, these nudges, they speak in a language that doesn't need translation. The world is full of noise, but these moments feel like whispers meant just for you. Some people are skeptical of signs, but others, especially those who've loved deeply and lost bravely, know that meaning doesn't need to be explained. It just needs to be felt. A number, a word, a piece of music can become a bridge. And sometimes that bridge leads straight back to the person who's been on your heart all along. And then there's something even more personal, something you might not tell anyone else about. It's the feeling that they're with you, even when they're far away. It might happen late at night, when the house is quiet and the world is asleep. Or when you're doing something simple, watering the plants, stirring a pot on the stove, and you suddenly feel them near. You're not thinking about them on purpose, but it's like their presence wraps around you. Like they're sitting across the room or walking beside you down a familiar path. You might even speak to them out loud without realizing it. And it doesn't feel strange. It feels comforting. That's the power of emotional memory. The body remembers what the mind tries to bury. The heart holds on to what mattered most. So even when time has passed or contact has ended, that person can still feel close, because a piece of them still lives in you. Sometimes this closeness shows up in an even more unusual way. You feel different. Your energy shifts. You suddenly feel stronger, or lighter, or at times more restless than usual. You may not be able to explain it, but something in you has changed, and not just for a moment. That change can be a sign that they're thinking of you with great emotion. Maybe they're remembering something, regretting something, longing, praying, hoping. Whatever it is, the energy behind it reaches you, and you, without knowing exactly why, respond to it. This kind of connection doesn't always lead to a new beginning. Sometimes it brings closure. Other times it brings peace, but often it brings something even deeper. A sense of understanding, of knowing that what you felt was real, that you weren't imagining it, that the bond existed and still echoes in both of you. And if you've ever felt that your emotional world shifts when you think of someone, not just for a moment, but in a way that lingers, you're not alone. You might feel anxious, suddenly joyful, deeply nostalgic, or even full of love. All because one memory, one name, one soul is quietly moving within you. That kind of impact doesn't come from ordinary relationships. It comes from something lasting. Something that doesn't fade when people walk away or time stretches long. It's the kind of connection that continues shaping you, even in silence. And perhaps most powerfully of all, you can feel their emotions too. You sense when they're hurting. You feel when they're hopeful. You somehow know when they're thinking of you, even if they don't say a word. And that's not a coincidence. That's what happens when two people are connected through something deeper than reason. At a certain age, we stop needing constant contact to feel close. We stop waiting for apologies or explanations. We begin to understand the language of the heart. And we realize that love, true, deep, soulful love, can still exist in absence. It can still influence us, calm us, or even shake us. You might not have heard from them, but you still feel them. And that matters. Because love doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it shows up as a whisper, a thought, a tear, a heartbeat. And you know in that moment, they're with you, thinking of you, just as you're thinking of them. There are times in life when words fall short. When even if someone were to ask, "Why do you still think about them?" you'd just smile softly and say, "I just do." And that would be enough, because some connections don't need explaining. Some people leave behind more than just memories. They leave a presence, a feeling that lives quietly inside you, even when everything else has moved on. And that presence, it has power. It can lift you on days you feel alone. It can stir you when you're going about life on autopilot. It can bring tears to your eyes when you least expect them. That's not weakness. That's what it means to be human. To care. To have loved deeply and truly. You might not talk to them anymore, but their impact is still alive in you. You might feel calm just thinking of them. Or maybe it rattles you, throws you off balance. Maybe their memory soothes you on hard days. Or maybe it opens old wounds. Either way, that emotional influence is a sign. Because ordinary people don't stir the soul like that. Only the ones who've touched something deeper in us. The truth is, when someone can change your energy, even in their absence, it means the connection hasn't disappeared. It may have shifted. It may have gone quiet, but it's still there. And here's the thing that so many people don't talk about, especially later in life. Just because someone isn't in your everyday reality doesn't mean they're not still part of your emotional reality. You don't have to see them or hear from them, or even speak about them for their presence to shape your days. And maybe, just maybe, they feel that too. Maybe when they close their eyes, your face still visits them. Maybe when they hear a certain melody, they feel you beside them. Maybe there are moments, quiet, sacred moments, where their thoughts drift to you with no warning at all. And that's the beauty of emotional synchronicity. It doesn't need effort. It doesn't need planning. It just is. It exists in the spaces between thoughts. It moves through memory and intuition. It lingers in silence and shows up through signs when you need them most. It could be a dream that feels like a message, a number that appears again and again, a sudden urge to cry or smile or reach out. These aren't accidents. These are signals that love, true love, transcends logic. But here's something important to remember. Even if this bond is real, even if the energy between you still pulses through time and distance, your heart still deserves something more. Because the soul may speak in silence, but the heart still longs for action, for words spoken out loud, for presence, for peace, for clarity. So if this connection has brought you comfort, hold on to that. But if it has brought you pain, let that pain become a teacher, not a prison. You are not meant to wait forever. You are not meant to live only in memories. You are allowed to honor the love while still choosing joy. You are allowed to feel the pull of that person and still walk toward the future with hope. You're not imagining what you felt. You're not making it up. Those sudden emotional waves, those strange coincidences, those vivid dreams, they all mean something. But what they mean for you, only your heart can decide. Maybe it's a message to reach out. Or maybe it's a sign to finally let go. Maybe it's a reminder that love never really dies. Or maybe it's a gentle nudge to love yourself just as fiercely as you once loved them. Whatever it is, trust your inner knowing, that wisdom that's lived in you through decades of laughter and loss. The same wisdom that helped you build a life, face heartbreak, survive grief, and still keep going. That inner wisdom is your greatest compass. And it knows when something is real, even if no one else understands. So here's what I want to leave you with. If you feel them, it's very likely they feel you too. Maybe there's no message, no call, no clear confirmation. But if your soul keeps whispering their name, maybe it's because their soul remembers yours, even in silence. And if they never say it, if they never return, if the connection stays invisible but alive, you can still find peace. Because to have loved like that, to have felt so deeply that it leaves a trace, that's no small thing. That's something sacred, something worth honoring. So whether this connection leads to reunion or simply to healing, let it guide you gently. Let it remind you that you're still capable of feeling deeply, of receiving messages through emotion, of being moved, not just by memories, but by meaning. And if you're still waiting for a sign, let this video be it. You are not alone in what you feel, and you never have been. If this touched something inside you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Whether you've experienced one of these signs or just want to share your story, this is a space for you, your heart, your voice. And if you found comfort here, consider liking this video and subscribing to Strong Elderly Life, where we talk about love, wisdom, and how to live fully at every age. Here's to loving boldly, even when words go unspoken. Here's to trusting your heart, even when the world doesn't understand. And here's to living your fullest life, with or without closure. Because you are still vibrant. You are still wise. And your story is still unfolding. No matter how old you are, love still speaks. You just have to listen.